All right, welcome everybody to Artful Tuesdays. We got a full crew today to discuss Bernard Shaw's Saint Joan, as well as Dr. Leonard Peikoff's Discovering 8 Plays. And we have Shoshana, Mark, Anne, and what we're going to do to start us off, whether you've heard this play or whether you have not, or read this play, I should say, or not read this play, we wanted to give you a overview of the plot so you could follow our discussion and our, analysis, everything. And still, I hope you'll have the desire to read this play afterward for yourself. And Shoshana, if you wanted to give us a little bit of an orientation to what's going on in the play. Where are we? Who's in it? What's it about?
Okay, sure.
Maybe it's about St. Joan.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I'm going to tell you about St. Joan. Okay, sure, it's all right. It's a chronicle play. It's in 6 scenes and an epilogue. And yeah, I need to tell you something about Joan herself. Joan herself lived approximately 1412 to 1431. Doesn't know exactly when she was born. She died quite young. She was burned as a heretic. And her conviction was overturned in 1456. She was canonized in 1920. And then in 1923 comes the play, Shaw's play. Now, here's what you have when you read the play. You don't have it organized as acts, as is often the case. Instead, we've got scenes. And the first 3 scenes are her rise. In the first one, she persuades a French military captain to give her some soldiers to lift a siege as part of a plan to crown the Dauphin and to make him, King of France. And this is a scene in which she shows up. She's a teenager. He attempts to dismiss her, and she persuades him. Then in the next scene, she's not among the soldiers, but she's at court, and she reaches the Dauphin himself and inspires him to become a true leader, to expel the English and to restore the greatness of France. They talk about miracles, and she says, turning you into a leader, that might be a real miracle. Of course, it's a psychological miracle. So, Joan is triumphing with the soldiers. She's triumphing at court. She's triumphing with the Dauphin. And in her 3rd scene, she again triumphs. She's got a soldier friend, Dunois, and she rallies him to lead the soldiers to lay siege to Orléans. So these 3 scenes have some comedy, they have some drama, and there's a rising trend. Now, when we get to the 4th scene, we have a scene that's basically about Joan, but without Joan. And here we start, even if we didn't know that things are not going to work out for Joan, we see the clouds gathering. And here we have a conversation among a group of people who you might not think would have anything in common. We've got a French bishop, we've got an English chaplain, and we have an English nobleman. And all 3 of them agree that Joan is trouble, that she's the enemy, she's a threat to the existing orders, she's an enemy to feudalism, she's an enemy to religion, and they stand against her. So the 3 of them are in league against her. So it's kind of the opposite of earlier, where Joan kept gathering people on her side, and now we see who the powerful enemies are. The 5th scene is sometimes called the cathedral scene, and here she sees the Dauphin crowned, but it's also clear that she doesn't have the support of the people who were on her side before. And the Archbishop accuses her of pride, and her soldier ally says she needs a more realistic plan and more men. The Dauphin, he's perfectly happy to be king, but he doesn't want to continue on to take Paris. And basically they tell her that she's alone. And she says, all right, I'm alone. That's fine with me. But in the 6th scene, we see the trial. And what Shaw's done is he's skipped over her being caught and defeated and being on trial, being imprisoned. And now we have the English chaplain wanting her executed. We have the French bishop wanting her to accept the authority of the church. So in Shaw's version, he is not a malignant figure, but he's a religious figure who wants to save her soul and to save her life. And there's some tension in which she's interrogated, and she has answers for all the questions she's asked. And it's really kind of wonderful because you've got all of them against all of her. She's there, and she's clever. She listens to the questions. She has answers, and they agree that unfortunately that some of her answers are exactly confirming her guilt, because Cauchon wants her to affirm religion, and she keeps talking about her own judgment. Then she sees that the steak is being prepared, and she realizes that she's about to die and she's ready to recant. And Joan is not literate, so she has to make her mark on the page. But then when she finds out that instead of being freed, she's going to be imprisoned forever, she tears off that piece of paper and she says, "Light your fire." And now she's going to die. And then we see that, in fact, the English chaplain who had been in favor of her being executed has a different feeling once he sees the actuality. So that's the end of the 6 scenes. But we have
can I interrupt somewhere, just because I
Sure.
think this is a point that maybe I'm mistaken. It's not just that she sees the fire being built for her and opts out of fear. It's that her voices had told her she wouldn't burn, so she realizes that there was a form of deception, and so being the honest person that she is, she goes with what is the truth, right?
Well, I think that what's true is that she says no one could want her to walk into a fire. She says, "My voices have deceived me. I've been mocked by devils. My faith is broken. Only a fool will walk into a fire. God, who gave me my common sense, cannot will me to do that." Okay.
Yeah.
And then when she finds out what the actual plan is, she realizes that these people who were telling her to repent and recant and live a life in prison, they're the devils. They're the ones who were deceiving her, and that they have lied to her. She even says that, "My voices were right. They told me you were fools and that I was not to listen to your fine words nor trust to your charity. You promised me my life, but you lied." And then she goes on in a speech that we all know and love, saying what life is. Okay. Now the epilogue gives us a little more about what life is, because the epilogue takes place after the burning, and she is now, she has God's protection to return as a vision, and she says that she also has the power to return as a living being. But all the people there praise her, acknowledge that she is, pure and sinless and a fine person, but no one wants her back. They all have something else to do, someplace else to go, and all praise her, but no one wants her to return. And so at the end of the epilogue, Joan is once again all alone with nothing but her voices. Now, I haven't mentioned the voices until Mark led me to talk about them. And that is an element of the play, which, as you notice, I didn't feature, because what she says all the way through, and we can talk more about this, is she says, well, I listen to my voices. She doesn't particularly want other people to trust her voices, although she says that's how they come to me. That's how common sense comes to me. I have to explain it to you in terms of common sense, because that's all you can tolerate. But
she also talks about her voices at the beginning as imagination, right? They speak to me through my imagination. How else would they speak to me?
Right. That's how, and she talks about hearing them in the bells. And she also clearly wants not to use them as evidence for other people, even though they function as confirmation for herself. So at the end, we never actually hear the voices ourselves. We don't hear the voices. The voices.
I do want to ask a question about the epilogue. I know that some directors have cut the epilogue, but I find that the aspect of the epilogue where they say, "Don't come back," so through history, it's like, we're never going to get up to her level. We're always going to reject the heroes, the saints. But is that right, Shoshana? Is there no other place in the play where they say that they don't want her, that no one in history would ever really accept her?
Well, I think what's true is that the epilogue is very much part of the play, because the play is about Joan's aloneness, and that she doesn't have friends in the usual sense. She has people who follow her, but it's not as if she relies on them she's not going to look back, as she says, to see if anyone's following her. And what is true is that the epilogue has both sides. Everybody sees her. Everybody acknowledges her. Everyone praises her, including the bishop who sent her away, and Warwick, the nobleman who spoke against her, and the king and Dunois. But the idea that she's going to live again, as you know, they all spring to their feet in consternation. And that's what Shaw says, their offer is rejected and they desert her. And then there's a stage direction, something like this, that there's, quote, a white radiance descending on Joan. And I guess that's, it's not the voices, but it's as if, Shaw is marking her out, and she's on stage alone, speaking to God, saying, when God that made us this beautiful earth, when will it be ready to receive thy saints? So it's as if she understands that she's alone and she's going to be alone, and that is the same, not just for her, but for other saints, the pure people for whom there's no room on earth. And so what she's looking for is something in the future, but it's not actual, it's not imminent. And she couldn't, she knew this was coming. I think that she knew that she wasn't going to last more than a year. She says that, I think, in an earlier scene. She says that she'd been told that she was going to have about a year. On the other hand, she wasn't given a deadline as such, and it's not as if she could have avoided well, they tell her during the trial scene that she's digging her own grave and piling up the faggots for her own stake. But I think we have the impression that she says what she thinks, and she could do no other. So
now,
given that she's Joan, this is the spot she's in.
To bring Mark and Anne into this.
Oh.
So first off, one of the questions I was curious about with everybody was, what if you had a favorite Joan moment, right? And I don't know if you guys, so I don't know if you had anything to say about the plot, but Joan is, of course, she comes in and out. There's even a whole scene without her, but whenever she's there, for me, it's an electrifying moment, right? And it's exciting, and it's one of the real joys of reading this. And I would love to see it. I know there's a movie, we could talk about the movie, but so if you want, I could start with a quick little moment, but if you had a moment that you wanted to talk about first, that'd be great.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll start. It's a very quick moment. It's not the most exciting of them all, but like when I was thinking about her character, there are these little touches, which if you pay attention, I think are really interesting to think and integrate her character. And so there's one really early on when she meets with, basically with the army, and she's trying to get the military on her side so she can go to the Dauphin and convince him. And she, I think his name is Pellegrino or something like that. I cannot pronounce any of these names.
Polly. She calls him Polly.
Polly, thank you. Yeah, Polly. And there's just this moment when, she's like waiting, they call for her, and he tells her to sit down, Joan. And then she like curtsies and sits down. And I see this throughout. And one of the things that struck me is like when I, because this is I've read it a couple times in the past, and in rereading it, I thought about when I think of someone who's like very willful, I think of someone who's very obstinate and stubborn and doesn't ever listen to anything else anybody else has to say. But yet throughout the story, there are these little moments where she's like, okay, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Right. Like you want me to sit down. I'm not going to be a willful child for the sake of being a willful child. Right. And I just thought that was such a great little moment about she's trying to she has this massive will of like, oh, no, we're going to have this whole army go. I don't care what you say about that. You're going to give me your armor and that horse over there, and you're going to pay for it and thank me for it. Oh, but yeah, you want me to sit down? Okay, I'll sit down if you want me to sit down. Sure. And I just thought like those little things were really interesting about her character. So did you have a favorite Joan moment, Anne or Mark?
Well, Mark said before we began this, she really has a big speech, right? When she realizes that she's going to be imprisoned. And that is a wonderful speech about wanting freedom, right? She talks about being in the air and being with the animals and so on. And that's a beautiful speech. But Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's my favorite moment because it's so filled with a deep wisdom and understanding about what makes life meaningful. Life isn't just about biological existence, which she would of course be able to have perfectly fine in a prison cell. It's about exchange with the world around you. It's about interacting with and experiencing the world around you, and life is empty without that. There's a great moment. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was sort of early on when she's making her case to help the Dauphin. She says something, and she flips the whole crew on their head, who are adversaries from the very beginning. And one of the guys says, "She does that. She'll do that to you. See, she'll just do that." So they all sort of have to acknowledge how rhetorically powerful she is, how clear and confident and beyond her years and wisdom she is. And there's tons of moments like that where she turns the tables on the powers that be.
Well, she's a truth teller.
Mm-hmm.
It's not meant for rhetorical purposes, just to have an argument. It's just saying the truth. And she is a teenager. And unto that last line that Shoshana just quoted, how long? That's a truth statement as well.
Yeah, I think that the cleverness and the way that she turns the tables, that's a really good point, because what happens as you're watching it is that you are enlisted on Joan's side, and it almost feels as if, okay, she got the better of them, I'm getting the better of them. And she's even somewhat self-conscious about it. She says, well, you're telling me no, but you told me I couldn't come in here, and here I am. And you think that you're not going to help me, but you're going to see it's going to come out quite differently from what you're expecting. And yet she's not doing it with an "I told you so," but more like, well, just hang in here and join me, and you'll see what I have in mind. I love that scene with Light Your Fires, and actually what you pointed out about it. What is life? I think that for us who are interested in Ayn Rand, there's quite a parallel with Kira's speech when she says, what does it mean to be living, that I eat and sleep? There's more to life than that. Yeah, that you remember it, right?
Yeah,
it's the same. What counts as life? I know Anne didn't say what her favorite was, but I love the Light Your Fire speech. I also love the cathedral scene with I'm Alone, but some of the funny things are just plain funny. She's explaining to Robert her plan, and she's all gotten to know all the soldiers already. Jack will come willingly. He's a very kind gentleman. John Godsave will come, and Dick the archer and the servants. There'll be no trouble for you, Squire. I've arranged it all. You have only to give the order. And he, contemplating her in a stupor of amazement, well, I am damned. Joan, no, Squire, God is very merciful. Okay, and the blessed saints will intercede for you. You will go to paradise. And it's just funny because, I'll be damned was an expression, but she takes it literally, and she reassures him that he's not going to be damned. And that's because for her, that sort of thing has a reality that it doesn't for him in saying, I'll be damned. So it's cute, and again, I don't think that she's manipulative at all, in that she's not playing him. She's just, this is what she knows, and this is she knows what's going to happen. And as Shaw has her continually point out, she has good reasons. Mm-hmm. She's always got good reasons. She's got a plan up until scene 5. And then there's just.
Yeah, Mark.
Honesty is the greatest art of all. I mean, you have statesmen, aristocrats who have negotiated with statesmen all their lives and lived a particular way all their lives, who are outdone by somebody who just says it like it is. They don't have the craft to overcome that.
Well, and this is Shaw is famous for his wit, right? Mm-hmm. So there's lots of comedy, lots of laughs. And I think Leonard Peikoff, in his Discovering Great Plays as Literary Philosophy, talks about Ayn Rand as being very, very witty and has a sense of humor that you'll hear some people say, oh, I read The Fountainhead, it was so serious. And of course, we're reading it thinking how clever and witty and funny, sarcastic it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, objectivists don't get really credited for valuing humor too much, but when you listen to almost any Leonard Peikoff lecture, it's filled with humor and wit. there's really no more interesting lecturer out there, and no more funny guy out there who seems to have such a great perspective, and can use humor in the most seemingly serious ways to give us the medicine of philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a moment when there's an inquisitor. She's being questioned for heresy, and they're gonna burn her. And one of the things they talk about, which, so this will be a question for you guys about her femininity and masculinity, but this is on this version. It's on page 128. But she says they're talking about her vanity, right? And they ask her, this is not a time for vanity, Joan. You stand in great peril. And she says, I know it. Have I not been punished for my vanity? If I had not worn my cloth of gold surcoat in battle like a fool, that Burgundian soldier would never have pulled me backwards off my horse. And then he says, if you're so clever, this is the chaplain, if you are so clever at woman's work, why do you stay at home and do it? Or why do you not stay at home and do it, women's work? And she says, there are plenty of other women to do it, but there's nobody to do my work. And I just love that. That made me chuckle. And then they're like, come, we were talking about trifles, blah, 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 blah. I hear them squabbling. But just this idea of like this woman who's, she dresses like a man. She dresses and that really offends these very feminine men in a lot of ways. Right? They're very weak, not able to fight. They're squabblers. And here she comes, and she, has her hair cut short, and she goes in there and she battles, and she basically gives them all backbone, especially the soldiers, right? She gives them a will to fight, and she does all those great things. But I was curious what you thought about her femininity and her masculinity, if she had any femininity at all.
I think she's kind of androgynous, to be honest with you. I don't think she's particularly masculine. And you got to, she is a teenager. So she's, often played by a younger actress. And I think she's not, sex and gender is not what she's interested in. She's interested in doing the task. And to do the task, you've got to be in armor.
Mm-hmm.
And she makes the correct point about her wearing male clothing. She said, if I dressed as a woman, they would treat me as a woman in prison, and then what would become of me? And that, and as you say, if she's going to be out in battle, she doesn't want to be dragging around in a skirt. What's true historically is that apparently there was a breach with the real Joan. There was a breach of promise case against her, which she defended herself and won. Someone said that a man said she'd promised to marry him, and she said, no, I didn't. And she won. I wouldn't mind hearing more about that story. Legal experience for Joan. Yeah. And go ahead.
I'm sure today's woke generation would jump on something like that and make it a very significant part of the play. But I think it was a pragmatic choice on her part. She understood the stakes and how she had to live within those stakes.
Well, she talks throughout a little, like she has little mentions of her family and her brothers, and she got along with her brothers, but they also kicked her out, I think, at one point, or but she, because again, I can imagine this like 16-year-old or whatever just saying, hey, I'm getting these voices from God, we need to kick these English out, and then she just walks out and does that. And that's how the play opens, right? Is she's just kind of waiting, and she's pushing them all into action, which I thought was just, in my reading of classic literature, that tends to be what is the most masculine of trait, is right, the forward action, whereas the female is usually put as like the passive, and she's completely the opposite. Whereas all these other characters are very passive. And I was going to ask you all about the Dauphin, and if he, I don't know if I might be mispronouncing that, but if he is, if he reminds you of any figures today. So this is the guy he's the king-elect, essentially. He hasn't been quite anointed until the end, when that's what she's been, one of the voices tells her she's going to be the one to anoint the new king of France. And, when I met him in this book, and especially when you first meet him, and even throughout, he really, really reminded me of I'll say a political figure today. And maybe there's a lot of political figures, but I was curious if I was the only one who saw anything like that, which it looks like I am.
I guess I want to just interject the film, the black and white film. Richard Widmark actually plays the Dauphin, and he is not like he's a character actor, but you wouldn't think, oh, let's cast Richard Widmark, but he just gets so puny in it. I mean, I think he's hilarious. I think that actor does
his
really
puniness is important for sure.
But he does it. He makes himself puny.
He makes himself okay.
I mean, for smallness of mind and passivity, he could pass for almost any politician in Washington today. I mean,
that's true.
Who specifically do you think fits this
I was thinking
bill?
Just Biden. Like somebody who doesn't I get the impression with Biden that he doesn't really want to be president. And there's a scene where the Dauphin is like, these robes are too heavy. and like the crown is too heavy. It's like, I don't want this thing. And he talks about like, I just want you to leave me alone. Like he's just even though he's young, he's like this, and his son hates him and he hates his son. Like, I don't know. And he's such a nothing. He's so mealy mouthed. He's so weak. I mean, you're right. It could be any politician, especially I think on a national stage, but I don't know. For some reason, I thought of him as like a Biden, or Biden was like.
Yeah, I just think Biden is so vanilla. I mean, he's not vanilla. You
don't think the Dauphin is vanilla enough? Okay. What do you think? Yeah, go ahead, Shoshana.
I was just going to say that Shah's characters are always more vivid, and who they're, who the values that they have and the values than actual people we might meet in real life. The line for me for the Dauphin that characterizes him is when he says, "Another lecture, thank you." And so that's his whole life, is that other people are telling him things, and they're telling him things because he's not doing things on his own, but it's as if he's petulant and he wants to make that a criticism of another lecture, thank you. I don't remember how Richard Widmark delivered that line or if it was in there, but that's so the Dauphin, another lecture, thank you, as if somehow he's getting points for pointing out that people are telling him what to do.
But petulance is a great word for that character.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and he's getting bullied by everybody, right? He always says they're bullying me, and they're telling him to do this, to do that, and oh, you owe me money, and we're giving you this, and he's just such a pawn, which makes me think again. That's one of the things I think of with Biden is like, read this, do this, go over here. So it's just like that characteristic of he's really just a figure of of these other bigger characters.
It may be tragic that he has more personality than Biden.
Yeah, that may be the tragedy. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
I'm curious about what people think about why Leonard Peikoff chose this play, because it does have a religious quality to it, and Peikoff clearly loves Shaw, and there are other Shaw plays he could have chosen. But any thoughts about why?
And Shaw was a raving anti-Semite and socialist as well, so had lots of bad qualities personally, but. I mean, for me, this story is about independence and pride, and it really highlights thinking for yourself and binding yourself to your own conscience, and not letting the authority of even massive institutions with great power sway you from your mind. And she stands alone. I can't believe people would leave out the epilogue. In directing, because it's her triumph, really. I mean, it's really people coming back through history and time to say, wow, we like every prophet, every great hero usually gets their comeuppance long after they're gone, and what makes them a hero is that they stand against the tide. And so it's very true to see her alone at the end, and in light at the end. But it's also great for me to see that she went through that suffering and she went through that stuff, and it mattered. It did matter. People received it. They were changed by it. It shifted the world in a way, and at least shifted the worlds of these people in a way. So I thought you can't do without that victory in the end. You really can't. She can't just die at the stake.
Well, I think that basically they acknowledged she was right.
Yeah.
Joan was right. And the fact that they can't live up to it and be right themselves, that's their problem. But at least they've got this sense to recognize that Joan was right. I even like that bit that you pointed us to with the vanity, that she acknowledges realistically that she had some
She had some
fault,
of it. Yeah.
and that
It's not what they
might-
thought.
Right. It's what she
That's
thinks herself, that she might not have gotten caught if
Yeah.
she hadn't worn that. Well, you know, with everything against her, it's not surprising. I mean, the French and the English,
Yeah.
you know, the nobleman and the church, that it's not surprising that she could not survive all of that existentially, but spiritually, the epilogue gives her the victory. And as I said, it's like the end of the cathedral scene where she says she's alone, and that's
Well,
a good thing.
and you know, so many of the Shaw plays have an individualist side. You know, Pygmalion, which they made into My Fair Lady, Man and Superman, Misalliance, they all have very individualistic characters, but there's no one that's named Saint Joan. You know, that I think that's right, that this is the most individualist of them. But I encourage people to read others because they're pretty wonderful, and they're complicated, but they're fun.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, I
yeah, I
think
mean oh, go ahead, Shoshana, please.
I was just going to say, you know, in Independence, which you know, which you've mentioned and which Mark mentioned, is absolutely a cardinal quality of Joan. And in the play, the voices don't diminish that, because it's clear that the voices come from Joan. That, you know, that's the way that she thinks of the voices, as, you know, somehow they're within her. They don't come to other people. She doesn't expect other people to hear them. She, in a sense, translates them into other language for other people. She's alone. She's alone in her judgment, and she's alone in her error, and she's alone in her courage. And the fact that she can't win a battle all by herself, well, that's kind of how war is. You know, that it's not just a single champion, but what she has to do is to get other people to fight with her and for her. As far as, I'm just sort of thinking of Shaw's other plays, this one is so much about a single character, maybe more so than some. I mean, whenever I have a chance to see a Shaw play, that's interesting to me. I happen to be very fond of Arms and the Man, and I think that's I mean, it's a comedy, but it's also about heroism, and it's interesting to see how all the pieces fit together and how that play works out. Pygmalion, of course, is also a story about achieving a goal, but it diffuses the interest among several characters in a way that I don't think is quite true for Joan. This one is united, and a number of the plays that Leonard Peikoff chose do have that central character. You got no question. Well, I know there are people who think that Creon's got a lot of lines in Antigone, but, you know, there's no play without Antigone. You know, I think it is Antigone's play, and this is Joan's play. And I guess you could say with Don Carlo, it's really Pose's play. Yeah, but it's not. I don't think you would ever think that it's Don Carlo's play. It's Pose's play. It just happens to be named for Don. Really?
What were you gonna say, Kirk, before?
Well, so there was a super chat question from Mary Aline. So thank you, Mary Aline. And
Yay.
she's always there for us. And we have some discussion in the chat today. But so this is a little different, but you know, it's an interesting question that I'd actually want to know the answer to. Is Saint Joan a popular play in contemporary theater? And then she says in quotation, or in parentheses, politicians today are all losers. Thank you for that. But
you know,
yeah, is it?
Some things never change.
Yeah, exactly.
Shaw is not a popular playwright because he's so erudite and the language is so high. There is the Shaw Festival, which is a location we can go see Shaw plays, but they're also now doing musicals. They're doing Shaw,
Yes,
and they're doing other stuff.
They're doing a lot of stuff outside of Shaw. My wife actually used to be a member of that company, the Shaw Festival.
And they used to do, you know, Shaw. That was their thing.
That was the thing. That's why they called it the Shaw. Yep.
And it was, Mark, one of the earlier Shaw festivals that did cut the epilogue, FYI. And but early on. Yeah. But this one of the ones that are done is a popular one because it's very clean and clear. We did Man and Superman, which is one of my favorites. And people thought it was about Superman.
Like the comic book Superman?
And Yes. In fact, when Christopher Reeve got Superman, his father was a professor at Oxford. And his father said, I love Shaw, when Christopher Reeve told him, I got Superman.
That's awesome. So,
well, I guess I was going to say
Shoshana.
something else about Shaw in this play. Shaw did write very long plays, and this is a very long play. And you probably know that he used to get complaints, right? And people would say, well, your plays are so long, we can't get home from London because we missed the last train. And he said, well, obviously there need to be later trains. I mean, what comes first? But really, they are very long plays. And I think that that can have Superman's very long play, that can have an effect on a theater company being able to produce it. This play needs a very big cast. I mean, unless you're going to do a lot of doubling.
I think Eugene O'Neill beats Shaw in length of plays, and at least Shaw has a heroic sensibility to his writing that makes the time worth it. I don't know that you could say the same about sitting through a goddamn Eugene O'Neill play. Isn't it a strange interlude of something like 9 acts? Which is the play that's 9 acts?
Yeah.
9 acts.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's the famous one, right? The Iceman cometh and he bringeth all his drinking buddies.
Yeah. Okay. So, quick story. Quick story. I made a splash with people who are associated with Broadway through David Seltzer, because I came down to the wire on this show for CBS ages ago, and they wanted me to audition for Iceman Cometh. I since read the play, but at the time that I had to audition for it, I could not get through it. It was just killing me. And I literally went into the audition for a Broadway play with the play in front of me, reading like this. And I just, I walked out of there. And still they knew my work, but I wasn't willing to give it to them for that piece.
Well, how long is that piece? I never read it.
Insufferable play. How long is it? It's I don't think it's 3 or 4 acts, somewhere in the neighborhood of that, but it's just people in a bar waiting for waiting for help.
No action.
It's not.
Well, this play definitely has some action, right? One of the things that Peikoff pointed out that I thought was really interesting, because one of the values of doing this course for everybody is, even if you're not familiar with plays and theater, it's a great introduction to helping you see the broader picture. So, for instance, if you just read this on your own, I think, a common thing that I would do is think of it as just like Joan versus like the Englishmen and some dirty scoundrels on the side or something like that. But what Peikoff does is he helps to elevate and understand the powers of how she stands for nationalism and Protestantism at a specific time in history. And Peikoff talks a lot about the genius of Shaw to make a plot around this time where it's almost 100 years before Luther and the Protestant movement, but she is kind of the rumblings of that movement that's going to be happening and all the machinations. So, for instance, I thought we want to wrap up pretty soon, but I thought we could talk about some of these broader things of like the Archbishop and his practicality. And he has a line that Peikoff talks about where he says, the Archbishop. So this is the Archbishop, right? So in 92, right? And so Shaw has him say, if I had started my career a little later, I would have gone for Aristotle instead of Jesus, but it's too late for me. And I just thought, like, that's brilliant. And the Archbishop has all these great lines about how, what a miracle is. Oh yeah, I know miracles. That's not there's no miracles. He's so like, a miracle is basically what gets the people kowtowing, essentially, right? It's what gets the people in the pews. So if we could use this, great, we'll use that. But yeah, I really wanted to make sure we had a big plug for the absolute value that Peikoff has in this course that we've been talking about this whole time. It's just like, for me, helping me become a better reader of literature in general, just to see, because again, like when you're reading it, you could so get lost in these little moments and you forget that there's like this big thing that Shaw is really trying to convey about these forces against this lone figure.
Well, he is a genius. So when you read the play, you're following the mind of and it makes you smarter. I really think that reading this kind of literature, your mind gets a little workout, a little exercise.
Well, that I agree with. I always use that analogy. I love that analogy of giving your mind an exercise, even just in the attempting of trying to understand something, even if you aren't successful or you get something wrong. And, like I do that all the time, and it's still a good exercise.
Well, and I think that's true for the play also, that it was worth it for Shaw to do this, even if some elements are not completely successful. One of the things that Leonard Peikoff talks about is we got to deal with the question of the voices. And I think he brings up some of the same examples I would bring up, and I've taught this play, where Joan keeps talking about her common sense and her reasons, but still we got the voices in there, and there isn't ultimately a repudiation of the voices. That's one. Second is that Shaw wrote this preface in which he explained these bigger forces, and he's got a whole explanation of how there are bigger forces working in history, and they're working through Joan. Well, I didn't see them on the stage. And so Shaw he puts that in the preface.
Have your students
and I
read
guess
the play, or do you have your students read the preface?
Well, I have them read both, but I have been known to say that you need to read the play first and to think about what the play means on its own, and then you read what Shaw had to say, because
that's a good way to do it.
Well,
he's making some stuff up.
Yeah, and I think that there's a question of compatibility between the preface and the play, that it's maybe not the same Joan. In a mischievous mood, I've said that what really ought to be burned here is that preface.
Oh, yeah.
Just because
throwing down the gauntlet.
Well, maybe the artist doesn't always know exactly what they're creating.
Or he wants to work it into some bigger thought system that he wants to promote in general. But I think the play, he explains many things that are actually kind of, I think makes some sense about why he whitewashed Cauchon. He said that he wanted to make this not about a single villain, but about a bunch of forces. And
there are no villains, according to him.
Right.
According to Shaw. Yeah.
Right. And
there are no villains in this play, or there are no villains.
Oh, sorry. In this play, I don't know. Yeah, in this play, for sure.
You don't think Warwick is a villain?
That's Shaw's argument. I think Warwick is pretty horrible. Yeah.
I think he's the worst person on the planet in this story.
But part of what. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just saying. Does anybody else agree with that assessment? Because Cauchon is still, regardless, is trying to do right by what he knows. Warwick just wants her destroyed because she beat the English.
So I think first off, so the audience, so Warwick is English nobleman, an English aristocrat who is, I don't know if you guys agree with this, but he's very practical and pragmatic and just wants to destroy her because he believes she represents something that will eventually destroy all of his system of government, and I think he's right. Basically, his argument is if she anoints him in God and he gives all the lands of Europe, to God, then we are all just serfs to the king now, versus the king is just kind of the best of the aristocrats. And there's a little bit more of an equal footing. And that was a strange argument for me that I had a little bit of trouble with. Peikoff could, go ahead. No, Peikoff gives a really good example, or he gives an analogy of the states and the federal government, how in America, how originally there was a little bit more, individuality and autonomy of the states, but as time progressed, the federal government became more and more powerful. And that's, I think, that's what he's saying the Warwick argument is. Yeah, and I agree with that. In fact, I feel like Warwick is making the argument for the nobility as a balance of power, say, against the king, which was sort of a fundamental tenet of English law, right? Of the English quote unquote constitution, was these aristocrats fought King John at first and gave us the Magna Carta and the beginning of rights, and they stood, the peerage, I guess, as you called them, stood as a sort of wedge against the overreaching power of the king. And there's something
to that, right? There's something to the things that Warwick, is saying in a good sense, in a democratic sense, in a way that we would understand today as being a good thing. But he's not a good guy. He's not.
Well, see, they're both they're all Shoshana and Warwick are evil in the sense of, you know, being against Joan as an individualist, and he even says that these two ideas of, you know, in the scene without Joan are the same idea at bottom. It goes deep, my lord. It is the protest of the individual soul, that's Joan, against the interference of priest or peer between the private man and his God. Okay, so that's what Joan represents. And so I guess from our standpoint, you know, that certainly qualifies him as a villain, but not for Shaw.
Yeah, I think that's
sort of, Shaw is not defending the individual soul in the way that the character of Joan does.
Explain that to me. I'm not privy to this argument of Shaw's that there are no villains in this.
Oh, well, it's in the preface.
Well, but again, this is the like the Shoshana character who's representing of the church, right? He's making the argument that he wants the Inquisition to be as fair and justified as possible. And the idea is that, I mean, I could be wrong in my interpretation of Shaw's understanding of this, is that he didn't want them to be evil, and maybe it's the, you know, mustache twirling, wanting to destroy them. It's they give her every chance possible to get out of this thing, right? And they keep giving her these chances, and she keeps pursuing it in her own way. I think what he's saying is like these characters are just doing what is in the best interest of the forces they represent, in a sense, right? So like her representation of Protestantism is going to destroy the church. So the whole point of, you know, the Catholic Church versus Protestantism is like, you now have a direct line to God, in a sense, whereas the church was supposed to be all the wisdom. And you're supposed to go to the church, and they keep asking her to do that, right? They keep saying, look, you're telling me that I'm lying. I'm the, you know, vicar of Christ. What are you talking about? You can't tell me I'm lying. And she's like, no, but the bells told me, right? And so I think the idea is that they're not trying to destroy her for the sake of destroying her. She represents a real threat. And I think that's my only understanding of
a real threat to an establishment that they believe in or invest
that they truly believe in, and they think is truly good.
But still, you could say that about Nazis. You could say that about the true believers of the
I think you could. Yeah.
And he could
that's
too.
Correct. Yeah.
And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they were bad because exactly of the thing they were fighting for.
Yes.
Oh, well, we need to explain that to Shaw, but it's a little too late. It's here in the preface under tragedy, not melodrama. That's where it is. It's in this copy, it's on 48. There are no villains in the piece. And it is what normally innocent people do that concerns us. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and to me, the thing that's always,
I don't like it, but
it's just like trying to understand what he's trying to do. I mean, to me though, that what I got out of it is the horror of true believers, in a sense, right? Like that there's this kind of machination of belief, and, you know, but yet you get this triumphant figure who rises above all of it, that's better than all these petty little bureaucrats. Like they're basically, in the end, these petty little bureaucrats. Like I love the little gentleman at the end. I mean, if you guys have any final thoughts, we can end on this part, but like in the epilogue, there's the gentleman from the 1920s and he just kind of pops up, and he has one of the last lines. And this is like when they're talking about her being resurrected. Right. And, you know, so this possibility, like, oh, let's resurrect her now. We all think she's a saint. Let's have the saints come marching in, right? And he's like, the possibility of your resurrection was not contemplated in the recent proceedings for your canonization. I must return to Rome for fresh instructions. And I just thought like the characters really had that, you know, because they have no self, they have very little will. They kind of just represent these things. But she definitely does. And, you know, the last thing that maybe I'll say is Shoshana says, who's, you know, really defending her in this sense, I think at the end, must then a Christ perish in torment in every age, to save those that have no imagination. Because the idea that if she were to be brought back alive, she'd have to be killed again every 100 years or whatever, so that we can, because people can't just read stories and conjure up the meaning and moral of these stories, which to me is like why you should read literature, is to develop your imagination and to not have to actually kill a Saint Joan to learn the lesson of the problem of killing Saint Joan. So any final thoughts?
Are all these characters true historical characters?
Not
Shoshana?
all of them, but I think a lot of the trial is actually quoted from Joan. The 1920s gentleman is just a,
because the Archbishop Cochan.
He's real.
Okay.
He's the bishop. There's also an archbishop, and the archbishop we got very little about him, but the real Bishop Cochan, he was real. Bishop of
Cochan. It's so terribly close to the French word for pig.
I know.
Isn't it great? But also the fact that we're hearing Joan's words, that blows my mind. That so much of what she's saying is what she said in the trial.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Well, Shaw had a copy of that. It was a big, long transcript, and he made a number of changes. One of the things he said is, I know we got to end, but he said this is the easiest play I had to write ever, because I could just take it all from that. But of course, he made changes and he improved things a bit, including sharpening some of the wit, making Cochan less of a bad guy in this version, and less of a target of Joan's reposts. But she was, some of the very famous things that are in here, she actually said.
Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah.
All right, and sorry, go ahead.
No, I just also essentially wanted to look at that epilogue again, because just go through it one more time and you see they keep talking about the soul. And I think part of the power of the epilogue is, that her body was burned, but her soul lives on. And the others talk about that too. You've shown us the power of the living soul. And so in a way, it's Joan's victory over them, because there she is. And of course, here she is on stage. Can I just say one thing? There's a book that I like called Playing Joan.
Sure.
And it's a book edited by Holly Hill, whom some of you may remember as having played Nancy Lee Faulkner in Penthouse Legend back in 1973. But she was also a scholar, and she interviewed many performers who played the role of Joan, and she got them to talk about what it was like to play that role. So for those of us who haven't seen that many Joans, it gives you some sense of what it would have been like, what it was like for them from the inside to take on the equivalent of Hamlet. The people always want to play Hamlet, and it's the role that makes or breaks you, and that's what it was like to play Joan. So you've got that book, and I've got it too. And if you go to the New York Theater Library, they have the actual interviews there.
Wow.
Wow. Cool.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That's great.
right,
All I wanted
Anne?
to say is that I hope that people will read Discovering Great Plays as Literature and Philosophy, Leonard Peikoff, and will read the plays therein.
Including the epilogue.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Mark, any final thoughts?
I just will echo what Anne said, and with a particular emphasis on Saint Joan. If you need your individualism fix, if you need to see what courage looks like, refer to this play, and you'll get your virtue fix for the day.
Oh, if you were to play, as an actor, if you had the option to play any character, who would you choose?
Oh boy.
In a real Broadway play, in
this version, you mean in this play?
Yeah, in this play.
Well, I was talking a lot of Warwick's lines out loud because I found him.
That's who he would be cast as.
I found him.
That's who I would cast him.
Oh, that's who you would cast him as. Okay.
I found him droll and sophisticated and cynical in ways that were interesting to me.
All right. Well, there we go. Now we have the director, we have the actor, we have the scholar. So we're ready to go. Let's make this happen. All right, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us for Artful Tuesdays. Sorry, Robert, I didn't get to read yours, but thank you for your super chat, Robert Naser. But we will be on Clubhouse. So Robert, if you want to join us, or a few of us, I don't know if everybody will be, but a few of us will be on Clubhouse right after this. And Robert, if you want to ask that question again, we'll let you have the first.
I wonder what it is.
Line. Yeah. So I'll read it if he can't make the Clubhouse. But thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time. I think we have one more play to do. Is it Cyrano next?
Cyrano.
Okay. All right. There
Wow.
Yeah, Cyrano. We'll have to do like a 4-hour special with like 30 different people. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.